Very much for joining us. We begin with breaking news. It's crunch time in the Republican push for a massive tax overhaul. The House of Representatives set to vote any moment, and Republicans are very optimistic. They have the votes to pass their tax plan. We expect to hear from the House Speaker Paul Ryan shortly. We'll bring you that live. President Trump, meanwhile, made the trip to Capitol Hill to rally Republicans just ahead of the vote in the House. The president is counting on tax reform as he looks for his first major legislative accomplishment as we await the vote. Let's take a look at some of the highlights from the House version of the legislation. It lowers the corporate tax rate here in the United States from 35% to 20%, reduces the number of tax brackets for tax filers from 7 to 4, and limits state and local tax deductions. It does not include the repeal of the Obamacare individual mandate that's included in the Senate bill right now. The average tax cut, by the way, would be about $1,200 next year. It drops to $860 by 2027. That, according to the Tax Policy Center. It's been 3 decades since Congress passed a major tax overhaul. House Republicans are cautiously confident that this is indeed their moment. Let's go live to Capitol Hill. Our congressional correspondent, Phil Mattingly, is on the scene for us. Phil, first of all, I assume the Republicans, they are very optimistic. They think they have the votes to pass their version of the tax cuts within the next several minutes.
Yeah, Wolf, that's right. According to senior aides I've spoken to, some members I've spoken to as well, locked in is the words you keep hearing. They are there. They will have the votes. The question now will be, how big of a vote can they get? Obviously, they know they're going to lose members. They know particularly some of the Northeastern members, the people who have issues with the state and local tax deduction, will vote no on this. But that's not going to be enough to take down the bill. And they should have a fairly comfortable margin, I'm told. That's a big deal, especially when you look through some of the legislative failures that have happened over the last 10 months. But, Wolf, it's important to note that bill that you read off very well, what's inside of it, is just the first step. There are multiple iterations going around right now. The Senate is obviously moving through their version. So while it is a big step, it is a very consequential step. It is a step that President Trump, as he walked out of his meeting with the House Republican Congress just about 20 minutes ago, said things are going very well, but there are many more steps to come and a lot of hurdles that come with those steps, Wolf.
And there's one version in the House. There's another version in the Senate. The focus will shift to the Senate. Republicans are facing some serious challenges there. Update our viewers, Phil. What's the latest state of play with the Senate bill?
So the Senate bill right now is in committee, and they're moving through it. A lot of amendments going on right now, but there's a couple of elements here that have really started to bubble up, and you understand kind of how complicated this process is. And while the House victory is certainly a big deal, there's a lot left to come. And first and foremost, you had the first opposition to the bill. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin coming out last night and saying he has an issue with the pass-through entity rates. And that's kind of in the weeds here, but essentially it's smaller business entities that pay taxes through the individual side. Senator Johnson doesn't like where that currently stands. He wants that to change. You have Susan Collins, who has issues with the inclusion of the repeal of the Obamacare individual mandate. You have people like Bob Corker or Jeff Flake, who are concerned about deficit issues. You have John McCain, obviously, who helped sink health care over procedural reasons, wants to make sure the process is working well here, too. And then you get into the details of the bill. Wolf, just a few moments ago, earlier this morning, the Joint Committee on Taxation, a nonpartisan group, releasing the details of their analysis of the latest version of the Senate bill. And while in 2019 there is a significant tax cut across all income brackets, by 2021, in large part because of the repeal of the individual mandate, according to this analysis, those making between $10,000 and $30,000 a year would see an increase in taxes. By 2027, anyone making under $75,000 a year, because of the way the individual rate cuts would phase out, would also see an increase. Republicans, Wolf, they're pushing back on that analysis, but you better believe Democrats have seized on that. They are pushing that forward, and that's going to create problems as Republicans try and move through this still very lengthy process over the next couple of weeks, Wolf.
Yeah, even if it passes the House, it's not yet a done deal in the Senate. Very different version in the Senate. Phil, we're going to get back to you. Phil Mattingly is up on Capitol Hill. We're keeping a very close eye on Capitol Hill, where the vote on the House tax plan set to happen any moment. Once again, though, even if it passes as expected, some Republican lawmakers have deep concerns about the current version of the bill. Republican Congressman Tom Reed of New York State is joining us right now from Capitol Hill. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Wolf.
You going to vote for this bill?
I am. I'm very comfortable with this bill, working on it in committee, working on it for the last 7 years. This is the moment to move it forward and give the relief to the American people that it's going to represent.
One of the major concerns, though, of Republicans from high tax states like New York State, you're from Western New York, is the possibility of eliminating what's called the SALT deduction, the state and local tax deduction. That's going to impact, if it goes through and the Senate version completely eliminates it, you have a partial elimination in the House. It's going to increase taxes for a lot of your constituents. Are you deeply concerned about that?
Well, I'm very confident, given where the Senate's complete elimination of the state and local tax deduction is something I will not support and will fight against, that a compromise position, like we see with the property tax deduction retention up to $10,000 for property owners, in our area, that's a lot of relief in Western New York. And I think this is going to get better, in my opinion, through the Senate conference committee process that we envision happening as we go forward.
So if the Senate version with a complete elimination of the state and local tax deduction is passed, you will vote against the tax cut, the final version, if it should emerge along those lines?
Yeah, well, if I've made my position very clear, I cannot support the complete elimination of state and local tax deduction. So I'm very confident where we are in the House is the first step, and we're going to do even more advocacy to make sure that we're representing the people back home and give them additional relief. If we can get that through the conference negotiations with the Senate, I'm confident we can get there, but we're going to keep fighting. But at a minimum, we have to keep the property tax portion of the state and local tax deduction.
As you just heard our Phil Mattingly report from Capitol Hill, the new assessment from the nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation, and you heard him reported people making between $10,000 a year and $30,000 a year would see tax increases by 2021. Now, how do you justify raising taxes on someone making between $10,000 and $30,000 a year?
You know, we'll take a look at that analysis. I really do appreciate the Joint Committee on Taxation and their work, and any final bill is going to take care of that type of conclusion that they've come to, because that is not the intention of what we're doing here. As a Republican member of the Ways and Means Committee, I can guarantee you those folks are going to get tax relief, no tax increases. And as we go through this process, we'll make sure we fix any of those type of consequences.
Congressman Tom Reed of New York, thanks so much for joining us. We have breaking news coming in.